The air on Val's Scorn was a sickly, metallic haze, thick with the scent of ozone and charnel. It clung to the ragged feathers of Shaper Caro, making his already perpetually damp skin feel slick with grime and the invisible ash of 1,000 fallen warriors. He surveyed the ruin of what had once been an imperial refinery complex, a testament to the brief, brutal conflict that had scorched this moon-fractured world. His kindred, the Kroot, moved with their customary efficient grace, a flowing tide of emerald and bone, picking through the wreckage for salvage, for weapons, but most importantly, for the genetic legacy of the defeated. This was their way, the ceaseless hunt for advantageous traits, the sacred consumption that fueled their evolution, their very existence in a galaxy that sought to exterminate them. Karho was older than many Kroot sharers, his beak-like mouth scarred, his eyes holding the ancient wisdom of countless ancestral memories. He had guided the Kroot through asteroid fields choked with orc hulks, across war-torn agri-worlds against the bloated forces of chaos, and now to the ash-choked plains of Val's Scorn, a moon deemed strategically vital by the Tau Empire. The Tau, in their earnest but naive pursuit of the greater good, saw the Kroot as a pragmatic auxiliary, a savage but effective tool in their burgeoning interstellar dominion. Caro saw them as a means to an end, a shield and a key, unknowingly providing the canvas upon which he might paint his kindred's future. Today, however, the quarry was different. The imperial forces here had been routed not by Tau railguns or Kroot charge, but by something far more insidious. Something that left behind not just corpses, but a pervasive, unnatural silence. The reports from the advance scouts had been fragmented, whispers of pale skin, too many limbs, and a sickeningly sweet odor that lingered even after the initial threat had been neutralized. This was the sign of a genestealer cult, a cancer that metastasized in the shadows, preying on the weak, subverting the unwary. The Tau, in their limited understanding of such horrors, had simply designated it as a hostile Xenos incursion, and unleashed the Kroot to cleanse the biological threat. For Karho, this was not just another hunt. It was an opportunity. He had felt the psychic ripples, faint but persistent, even through the void static that often permeated the moon's atmosphere. A powerful organism had been here, one of immense genetic complexity and unique evolutionary pathways. He led his personal war band, a hand-picked assembly of his most skilled Kroot, through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the refinery. The air grew heavier, cloying, carrying the metallic tang of dried blood, and something else, a sweet, fungal decay that hinted at organic growth in places no natural life should thrive. The tunnels, crudely hewn from the moon's rock, were stained with violet ichor and bore crude, hastily scrawled symbols of a four-armed god. They found the remnants of the cult's nest deep within a geothermal vent chamber, where the ambient heat had kept the organic matter from fully decaying. It was a charnel house, a grotesque tableau of mutated imperial citizenry, their bodies ruptured, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. Among them, several pure strains lay dead, their chitinous forms rent by Tau pulse fire and the brutal force of Kroot knives. But Karho's focus was drawn to the center of the chamber. There, slumped against a cooling geothermal pipe, was the behemoth. It was a genestealer patriarch, or what was left of it. Its four powerful arms were twisted, one torn from its socket, its immense head partially collapsed, a dark, viscous fluid leaking from its ruined sensory organs. It was immense, easily 3 times the size of a standard genestealer, its carapaced hide a sickly purple. But what truly captivated Karho was not its physical form, but the residual psychic hum that still emanated from it, even in death. It was a thrumming symphony of alien instinct, of millennia of genetic memory, of a species designed solely for consumption and replication. "Shaper?" came the cautious voice of Grextal, Karho's ancient Kroxagor companion, his voice a low rumble. "The Tau would have us incinerate this place. Contamination." Karho ignored him. His sharp, Kroot eyes scanned the fallen patriarch. Its sheer genetic vitality, even in death, was palpable. He knelt, his fingers surprisingly delicate despite their reptilian scales, brushing against the cooling chitin. He felt it, the whisper of a vast, alien consciousness, not an individual mind, but a collective memory, a blueprint for universal conquest through assimilation. It was a glimpse into a genetic potential beyond anything his kindred had ever conceived. The Kroot traditionally consumed the brains and bone marrow of their fallen foes, absorbing their genetic traits and memories. This was how they evolved, how they adapted. But a creature of this scale, of this psychic potency, was unprecedented. It was a risk. The genetic essence of a genestealer was a treacherous thing, capable of corrupting, of overwhelming the consumer. Yet the reward, the potential reward, was intoxicating. "No," Karho rasped, his voice rough. "This is a gift, a feast." He drew his ritual blade, a shard of bone honed to razor sharpness, and carefully, meticulously began to extract the brain matter from the shattered skull of the patriarch. The other Kroot watched in a tense silence, their hackles slightly raised. They understood the danger, the taboo of consuming something so inherently alien, so fundamentally wrong according to the natural order of life. But they also trusted their shaper implicitly. His instincts had never led them astray. As Kroot ingested the first pulsing morsel, a jolt, sharper than any electrical discharge, coursed through his body. It was not merely a memory. It was an inundation, a torrent of genetic imperatives, of vast, cold intelligence, of an overwhelming drive to consume and propagate, flooded his consciousness. He saw galaxies consumed, worlds stripped bare, species folded into the vast, ravenous maw of the hive mind. He experienced the deep, primal hunger of the tyrannid, a hunger that made the Kroot's traditional evolutionary drive seem like a child's whim. For a moment, Kroot staggered, his hands flying to his head, a guttural cry escaping his throat. His knees buckled, and he fell heavily to the ground, convulsing. Grexital moved forward, a protective growl rumbling in his chest, ready to strike down their shaper if he was truly lost to the alien influence. But Kroot fought back. He had consumed countless species in his long life, absorbed a myriad of memories and instincts. He had always maintained his self. This was different, vaster, more insidious. It was a war for his very essence. Hours later, when the tow cleanup crews arrived, they found Kroot standing over the skeletal remains of the patriarch, his eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity in the dim light of the cavern. He was calm, outwardly composed, but something in his gaze had irrevocably changed. The ancient wisdom was still there, but now it was laced with a chilling, calculating intellect, a predatory gleam that seemed to pierce the very fabric of existence. The Kroot kindred had consumed the remains, as was their custom. But it was Kroot alone who had taken the patriarch's brain. Kroot alone who had wrestled with its dying consciousness and emerged, not corrupted, but irrevocably altered. He had not merely consumed a defunct patriarch, he had consumed a new path, a new, terrifying destiny for his kindred. The universe, to shaper Kroot, had just opened up. The aftermath of the patriarch's consumption was not a singular event, but an enduring siege upon Kroot's very essence. He had believed himself resilient, his mind tempered by centuries of absorbing countless species, his spirit anchored by the collective memories of the Kroot kindred. Yet, the Genestealer patriarch was not merely another Xenos to be assimilated. It was a fragment of an overarching, insatiable entity, a psychic echo of the great devourer itself. For days, Karho withdrew from his kindred, ostensibly to meditate on the tactical implications of their recent victory, but in truth, to wage a silent, desperate war within the confines of his own skull. The psychic echoes were a ceaseless cacophony, a million alien voices whispering of consumption, of growth, of perfect, horrific biological efficiency. He saw, not through his own eyes, but through the composite vision of countless generations of Genestealers, the shadowed corridors of starships infiltrated, the fervent, deluded prayers of cultists, the terrifying emergence of broods from human wombs, the cold, distant logic of the hive mind guiding all. He felt the hunger, a deep, abiding ache, not for sustenance, but for assimilation, for the raw genetic material that fueled the Tyranid advance. His Kroot metabolism, usually a rapid fire of cellular adaptation, went into overdrive, struggling to process the sheer volume of alien data. His senses sharpened to an almost unbearable degree. The scent of ozone from the geothermal vents became an acrid burn. The distant hum of the tow dropships, a grating roar. He could hear the frantic scuttling of moon mites in the dust, the almost imperceptible thrum of energy conduits far beneath the surface. His skin, usually a muted green, sometimes flushed with a sickly purple hue, then receded. His quills, usually stiff and proud, sometimes twitched and splayed as if reacting to an unseen psychic storm. The greatest struggle was the insidious, creeping imperative to replicate. The patriarch's essence screamed for propagation, for the meticulous infiltration and subversion of new hosts. Karo's Kroot mind recoiled. His kindred propagated through controlled consumption and subsequent genetic refinement, a slow, deliberate evolution. The Tyranid way was a cancerous spread, a horrifyingly efficient biological virus. He found himself wrestling with alien urges to find suitable hosts among the Tow auxiliary, to implant his seed into the unsuspecting Kroot, to twist the very essence of his kindred into something else. It was the accumulated weight of his ancestral memories that provided the anchor he desperately needed. The stoic faces of long-dead sharers, the primal thrill of the hunt, the deep-seated pride in their unique evolutionary path, these served as bulwark against the encroaching alien consciousness. He tapped into the memories of Kroot, who had consumed other dangerous entities, who had wrestled with sanity blasting psychic echoes, who had emerged stronger, but not necessarily unchanged. His Kroot mind, designed for genetic integration, began, painfully slowly, to break down the Tyranid imperative, not to destroy it, but to understand it, to categorize and store it, like a dangerous but valuable trophy. He began to realize that the Patriarch's essence was not a singular, monolithic entity, but a complex, multi-layered information stream. Within the flood of consumption and replication lay incredibly detailed genetic blueprints, sophisticated biological engineering protocols, and an unprecedented understanding of organic adaptation. The Tyranids did not merely consume. They refined. They optimized. They integrated. Karho saw how a single organism's genetic code could be dissected, its useful traits extracted, and then woven into the evolving tapestry of the hive fleet. This was the terrifying new hunger that began to take root in Karho's core. Not just to consume, but to control the consumption. Not just to evolve, but to direct the evolution. He began to perceive the galaxy not just as a hunting ground, but as an infinite genetic library, a vast, untapped resource of unique biological data waiting to be harnessed. The Tau's relentless expansion, their seemingly arbitrary choices of new worlds to colonize, now seemed like a wasted opportunity, a blind stumbling when true purpose could be found. As the raw psychic storm began to subside, replaced by a colder, more analytical understanding, Karho emerged from his self-imposed isolation. His kindred, led by Grextal, had watched him with a mixture of fear and profound respect. They knew he had faced something monstrous, and they saw the subtle, unsettling changes. His movements were smoother, almost predatory in their grace. His eyes, usually deep and knowing, now held a disturbing, distant gleam, as if always processing a vast, unseen stream of information. Grextal, his Kroxagor frame, a mountain of muscle and loyalty, approached his shaper with caution. "Karo," he rumbled, his voice a low growl. "Are you whole?" Karo turned, his head cocked slightly, a gesture that was both familiar and subtly alien. "Whole, Grextal," he replied, his voice a dry rasp. "And more. I have seen the true path of evolution." There was a new cadence to his speech, a precise economy of words that hinted at an altered thought process. The Tau seek to unify by fire and dogma, the Imperium by stagnation and fear. The Tyranid, they seek to perfect by consumption. And we, my old friend, we shall learn from all of them. he began to test his new insights discreetly. During the next few weeks, as the Kahrok continued their mopping-up operations on Vol's scorn, Karho's tactical decisions became startlingly precise. He predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, seemingly knowing where small pockets of imperial resistance would muster, where salvageable weapons caches would be found, even where local flora might provide an unexpected genetic boost. He directed his kindred to consume specific creatures native to the moon, not for immediate sustenance, but for minute, almost imperceptible traits, a greater resistance to radiation, an improved night vision in the perpetual twilight, a more efficient cellular repair mechanism. His fellow Kroot didn't question it. Karo's instincts were legendary, but they noticed the increased rate of mutation in their own ranks, a subtle hardening of quills, a slight increase in muscle density, a heightened sense of aggression. The mental toll was immense. Cairo rarely slept, his mind ceaselessly sifting through the layers of memory, correlating the Tyrannid data with his own Kroot understanding. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a chasm opening between himself and his kindred. He was no longer just Karo, the wise shaper. He was also a conduit, a whisperer of the great devourer, a nascent architect of a new, terrifying evolutionary paradigm. The grim realization settled upon him. The power he now wielded was immense, but it came at the cost of his former identity. He was forever changed, forever walking a path that diverged from all established Kroot traditions, a path that was both glorious and utterly horrifying. As the Tau Command prepared for their next expansionary push, discussing potential target worlds for colonization and resource extraction, Karho listened. But his mind was already miles away, dissecting the galactic map with an entirely new lens. He saw not just strategic value, but genetic potential. He saw worlds teeming with unique biospheres, with creatures whose evolutionary pathways might unlock untold power for his kindred. The seed of his grand plan, nurtured by the psychic echoes of the defunct patriarch, had taken root. He would subtly, meticulously, redirect the Tau's noble ambition towards his own grim purpose. The greater good, he now understood, could be a vessel for a far more ancient, far more primal imperative. The Tau Empire, in its relentless pursuit of the greater good, was a machine of methodical expansion. Each new world, each nascent colony, was a cog in a grand design, meticulously planned by the patient Earth caste and secured by the disciplined Fire caste. Yet, even the most precise machinery could be subtly redirected by a skilled hand. Shaper Karo, now a silent master of observation and manipulation, became that hand. Following the successful pacification of Val's scorn, the Karok kindred returned to the burgeoning Tau orbital station, a gleaming testament to technological progress hovering above the scarred moon. Their reputation had soared. The Kroot, often seen as unpredictable barbarians, had performed with unprecedented efficiency and tactical acumen under Karo's leadership. Their ability to track and eliminate the Genestealer cult, a threat the Tau themselves struggled to fully comprehend, had earned them a rare respect, bordering on awe, from the Firecast commanders. This elevated standing was precisely what Karho needed. He was invited to strategic briefings, his insights, once tolerated as primitive intuition, now actively sought. He sat among the Tau commanders, his Kroot form a stark contrast to their sleek, blue-skinned figures, his silence often misinterpreted as deep contemplation. In reality, his mind was a storm of analysis, dissecting their plans, their proposed target worlds, and more importantly, the underlying genetic potential each offered. He began by offering subtle suggestions, cloaked in the guise of Kroot lore, or ancestral instinct. When the Tau debated between a mineral-rich asteroid belt and a lush, primordial jungle world, Karho would interject with a seemingly innocuous observation. The Old Ones speak of worlds where the very air holds strength, he might rasp, gesturing vaguely towards the jungle world. Worlds where the prey is challenging, good for the kindred, good for the greater good, to have strong auxiliaries. The Tau, always eager to integrate useful concepts from their auxiliaries, would consider this. The jungle world, designated Etherios, was indeed teeming with life, but also presented significant logistical challenges. Yet, Karho's instinct resonated with the Firecast's desire for battle-hardened troops, and the Earthcast saw potential in studying novel biomes. Etherios was added to the priority list. On Etherios, the Karok kindred performed with terrifying efficacy. The planet was a death world, its ecosystem dominated by hyper-aggressive, resilient flora and fauna. While the Firecast struggled with precision strikes against camouflaged predators, the Kroot melted into the environment. Karho, guided by the Genestealer's genetic memories, knew precisely where the most dangerous, most adaptable creatures nested. He led his warriors on daring hunts, their every kill a deliberate genetic acquisition. The consumption on Etherios was different. Karho directed his kindred to focus not just on physical prowess, but on more subtle, cellular adaptations. Acid resistance, from the burrowing gore worms, enhanced metabolic efficiency from the sun lizard photovores, even a primitive form of neural resilience from the psychic mind leeches that infested the deepest jungles. He himself consumed portions of creatures that displayed rapid regeneration or venomous secretions, carefully monitoring the internal changes, pushing the boundaries of what a Kroot body could integrate. The results were undeniable. The Kroot, already formidable, became even more so. Their skin grew tougher, their quills sharper, their movements faster. They developed a disturbing resistance to local toxins and an unsettling ability to track prey through dense foliage, far exceeding the Tau's technological sensors. Casualties were minimal, their adaptability phenomenal. Tau observers, accustomed to Kroot evolutionary quirks, simply attributed it to the unique challenges of Etherios and the exceptional leadership of Shaper Karho. Their reports to the High Command lauded the Kroot as the pinnacle of Kroot auxiliary effectiveness, a model for others. This success solidified Karho's influence. He was no longer just a tactical advisor. He was a genetic strategist, his recommendations given serious weight by the Tau ethereals themselves. He began to introduce the concept of ecological assessment into Tau expansion planning, subtly guiding them towards worlds with unique, often volatile biospheres. He spoke of how a diverse genetic diet makes for a stronger kindred, and how a world with many paths of life offers more opportunities for growth, even for the Tau. One particularly crucial redirection came when the Tau were poised to expand into a sparsely populated sector, prioritizing worlds rich in rare minerals. Karho, having studied the old star charts, saw a cluster of worlds beyond that sector, shrouded in nebulae, designated unsuitable for colonization due to extreme environmental conditions and highly complex, often dangerous ecosystems. These were the worlds he truly desired. He subtly undermined the mineral-rich sector's viability, planting seeds of doubt in the Earth caste's minds about unforeseen geological instabilities, or hinting at hidden dangers that the Kroot have sensed through the whispers of the wind. Concurrently, he emphasized the strategic importance of scouting the nebula-shrouded worlds, framing it as a long-term investment in Tau security. To know what lurks in the shadows, he declared in a rare public address to a council of fire and earth caste, is to truly be safe. Perhaps these worlds hold no wealth of ore, but they hold the wealth of challenge, of new adaptations, and a strong defense built upon strong auxiliaries is the truest path to the greater good. His words, delivered with a conviction born of alien insight swayed the council. The expansion was rerouted. Expeditionary fleets were dispatched to the nebulous regions, with the Kaharok kindred always at the vanguard. These worlds, teeming with exotic and often horrifying life, became Karo's laboratories. He didn't just consume now. He dissected. He analyzed. He planned. He understood the genetic pathways of resistance, of rapid adaptation, of self-repair. He began to imagine a Kroot that could not only survive in any environment, but thrive in it, bending its biology to the will of the moment. The process was slow, painstaking, and fraught with peril. Some of the consumed traits were unstable, leading to grotesque mutations that had to be purged from the kindred, a brutal culling that Karho oversaw with chilling detachment. He now viewed individual Kroot not just as warriors, but as living genetic vessels, parts of a grand experiment. His own body was a testament to this, having integrated a bewildering array of abilities. He could endure vacuums for short periods. His senses could pierce through dense electromagnetic interference, and his natural healing was accelerated to an unnatural degree. He was becoming something more than Kroot, something beyond what his ancestors could have ever conceived. The Tau, pleased with their exceptional auxiliaries, continued their methodical expansion, unknowingly serving as the unwitting architects of Karo's terrifying vision. Their reports spoke of the Kroot's unparalleled combat effectiveness and their vital role in securing new territory. What they failed to see was the silent, internal transformation, the subtle shift in allegiance, and the escalating ambition within their most valuable Xenos ally. Karo had risen to prominence, not through strength of arms alone, but through the insidious weapon of redirected purpose, a weapon forged in the genetic memory of a defunct patriarch. The Tau expansion was a carefully calibrated symphony of orbital bombardment, rapid ground deployment, and diplomatic outreach. Its movements were predictable, its targets often chosen for strategic resources or advantageous positions. Yet, under Karo's subtle guidance, a peculiar discord began to manifest in this symphony. The Tau High Command, particularly the Earth-cast planetary surveyors and the Fire-cast strategic planners, started to notice a pattern, a quiet anomaly that individually seemed innocuous, but collectively pointed to something unusual. It began with the selection of target worlds. While still possessing strategic value, an increasing number of chosen planets were characterized by particularly virulent biospheres. One planet, designated Viridia Prime by the Tau, was a verdant, overgrown death world, its atmosphere rich in complex organic compounds, but choked with spores that induced rapid, aggressive plant growth capable of overwhelming even advanced Tau flora control mechanisms. Another, Xylos Delta, was a desolate volcanic moon, constantly reshaped by seismic activity, yet possessed subterranean ecosystems of extremophile organisms displaying astonishing resilience. These were not the typical, easily terraformed worlds that usually topped the Earthcast's priority lists. Cairo's justifications were always couched in familiar Tau rhetoric, but subtly twisted. For Viridia Prime, he spoke of the bio-adaptability the Kroot could gain, leading to auxiliaries resilient against all environmental threats, invaluable for securing other difficult worlds. To master the green tide here, he'd explain to the Firecast Chasso, is to ensure no foe's environment can truly hold us. For Xylos Delta, he emphasized the toughness and endurance that Kroot would acquire from battling creatures hardened by constant geological upheaval, making them unbreakable shields for the Tau. The Tau leadership, while valuing the Kroot's pragmatic battlefield contributions, generally viewed them as less intellectually sophisticated than themselves. They attributed Karho's increasingly specific recommendations to a heightened, almost mystical Kroot intuition developed over centuries of navigating diverse alien ecosystems. This narrative was comforting. It fit their preconceived notions of their Xenos auxiliaries. They praised Karho for his unique insights, seeing him as a vital, if eccentric, asset to the greater good. However, the pattern of deployments began to stretch credulity for some. Why, for instance, were the Kahrok kindred so often at the forefront of these biologically volatile campaigns? Why were other Kroot kindreds, equally capable, consistently sidelined in favor of Karho's warriors for these specific missions? And why did the genetic samples returned for Earthcast study from these worlds so consistently display traits of rapid mutation and hyper-adaptation, often exceeding what would be expected from even Kroot consumption? These questions simmered beneath the surface, rarely voiced openly. It was the Earthcast who first felt the creeping unease. Fio Vre Tol, a meticulous xenobiologist stationed on a research outpost near a newly pacified death world, observed the raw genetic data from Kahrok battlefields. He noted the unprecedented rate of accelerated evolution within Karho's kindred. Kroot warrior forms that had been primarily bipedal and avian a few cycles prior were returning with hardened chitinous plates, multi-jointed limbs, or even rudimentary bioluminescent organs, all acquired from indigenous fauna that had been consumed. This was beyond normal Kroot adaptability. It hinted at a directed, almost artificial, genetic acceleration. Tool filed his reports, highlighting the anomalies. But his superiors, focused on the larger strategic picture, often dismissed them as Kroot peculiarities or unforeseen benefits of their unique biology. The greater good demanded unity, and questioning the loyalty or methods of a highly successful auxiliary was frowned upon, especially when the results were so advantageous on the battlefield. Yet the shadow continued to lengthen. Caro began to develop a specific, almost proprietary, interest in worlds that contained what he termed dormant biocatalysts, or genetic reservoirs. These were often planets with ancient, seemingly inert Xenos ruins, or isolated moons with unique geological formations that hinted at long extinct but immensely powerful biospheres. He would argue for their strategic importance, suggesting they might contain undiscovered technologies or rare resources, always ensuring the Kahrok were the primary reconnaissance and pacification force. On such a world, known only as Cinder Vein, a moon scarred by ancient orbital bombardment but possessing deep, geothermally active caverns, Caro directed his Kroot, while the Tau focused on erecting a forward operating base on the surface. Caro's kindred delved into the subterranean networks. There, they discovered not technology, but vast, crystalline formations laced with complex amino acid chains, remnants of an ancient, sentient fungal life that had been rendered dormant by the cataclysm. Caro, recognizing the potent genetic information preserved within, supervised the careful extraction of samples, ostensibly for Earth-cast analysis. In truth, much of it was consumed by his chosen cadre, integrated into their evolving forms. The psychological toll on his kindred began to show. The constant, accelerated consumption of diverse, often volatile genetic material was pushing their bodies to the brink, while their combat effectiveness was unparalleled. Some Kroot exhibited unsettling new traits. Some developed secondary, smaller mouths, lined with razor-sharp teeth, reminiscent of genestealer maws. Others found their quills growing into barbed, venomous spines. Their Kroot instincts were becoming sharper, but also crueler, more predatory. The subtle, cold logic of the patriarch's memory was seeping into the Kahrok's collective consciousness, twisting their ancestral hunger into something more ravenous, less discerning. The Tao themselves, in their well-meaning ignorance, were providing the perfect cover. Their relentless push into new territories meant a constant supply of diverse biospheres. Their belief in the greater good meant they saw the Kroot's growing effectiveness as a testament to their own benevolent influence, never suspecting the dark, self-serving ambition that truly drove Kroot. The shadow was deepening, but the Tao, basking in the light of their expanding empire, remained blissfully unaware. Kroot's chess game was intricate, slow, and utterly merciless, and with each successful redirection, his kindred crept closer to a horrifying new apotheosis. Fiovre Ramir was an anomaly among the Earth caste. Young, driven, and possessed of a keen intellect, he harbored a fervent belief in the scientific advancement of the greater good, particularly in the realm of xenobiology. Unlike many of his peers, who viewed xenospecies either as raw materials or problems to be solved, Ramir saw them as intricate puzzles, their biological intricacies offering pathways to understanding the universe itself. He was assigned to the Kroot Auxiliaries Integration Project, a long-term Tau initiative aimed at optimizing Kroot genetics for specific combat roles, and eventually, perhaps even civilizing them into a more predictable, less savage form. Armire had initially approached the Kroot kindred with enthusiasm. Their combat effectiveness was legendary, and the anecdotal evidence of their rapid adaptability was fascinating. He set up remote observation posts on several of the newly pacified worlds, deploying advanced bioscanners to meticulously record the genetic shifts within Kroot's warriors following their campaigns. His early reports were filled with optimism, documenting increased bone density, enhanced musculature, and even improvements in cellular regeneration. He attributed these positive changes to Kroot's unparalleled understanding of their traditional consumption practices. However, as the data accumulated from planets like Viridia Prime and Xylos Delta, Armire's enthusiasm slowly curdled into professional unease, then into a deep-seated apprehension. The genetic drift within the Kroot kindred wasn't just accelerated. It was becoming unpredictable. He observed traits emerging that served no obvious evolutionary advantage in their current environment, yet displayed a disturbing biological efficiency. On a campaign against highly corrosive, acid-dwelling xenofauna, Kroot warriors developed not just acid-resistant skin, but also internal glands that secreted powerful corrosive enzymes. During a period of intense cold weather deployment, some Kroot developed a dense layer of subcutaneous fat and specialized capillaries for heat retention, but also an alarming ability to enter a catatonic, near-death state, conserving energy for weeks, a trait wholly alien to Kroot biology and eerily similar to dormant spore forms. Most disturbingly, Ramir began to identify microscopic genetic markers, fragments of non-Kroot, non-Tau, and, indeed, non-known Xenos DNA, interwoven into the Kroot genome. These fragments were subtle, often dormant, but present. They spoke of a composite biology, an artificial amalgamation rather than organic evolution. He ran countless simulations, cross-referencing against known species, but the markers remained uncategorized. They were like ghost signals, hints of a vast, unseen biological library. His formal reports, once filled with glowing assessments, now contained cautious warnings. The rate of genetic flux within the Kroot kindred exceeds established parameters for Kroot evolution, he wrote in one particularly urgent communiqué. The emergence of seemingly disparate yet highly specialized traits suggests a directed rather than purely reactive adaptation. Further investigation into their consumption practices is advised, with particular emphasis on the source of their dietary intake. His concerns were, once again, largely ignored by the wider Tau bureaucracy. His immediate superior, a pragmatic earth-caste overseer named Phio Ui Malcor, simply admonished him to focus on optimizing existing Kroot benefits rather than speculating on theoretical anomalies. The fire caste, seeing only the unwavering effectiveness of the Kroot on the battlefield, continued to champion Karho. The ethereals, far removed from the granular data, simply saw another successful integration story. But Ramir was relentless. He requested, and eventually received, permission to directly study captured specimens of Kroot warriors exhibiting extreme mutations. What he found chilled him to the core. The internal structures were subtly different. Their secondary hearts, a common Kroot adaptation, were more efficient, but also possessed rudimentary chitinous plating. The neural pathways were more complex, almost layered, hinting at redundant processing capabilities far beyond what a Kroot required for normal function. Then came the incident on Ashfall, a moon devastated by ancient warfare but harboring unique fungal biomes. The Kroot were deployed against indigenous, burrowing Xenos. Ramir, observing from a secure drone feed, watched as a group of Kroot warriors, cornered and seemingly overwhelmed, suddenly emitted a low, resonant psychic pulse. The burrowing creatures, known for their aggression, recoiled in confusion, then began to tear at each other, their minds seemingly fractured. The Kroot then moved in for the kill, their actions disturbingly coordinated, almost instinctive. Ramir rewound the footage, ran it through every psychic dampening filter and resonance detector he possessed. The pulse was faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. It was not Tau. It was not Farsight Enclave's psychic nullification technology. It was something else, something primal and insidious. It reminded him, fleetingly, of ancient imperial archives he had secretly accessed, forbidden lore about psychers and the raw, untamed power of the warp. But this was different. This felt biological. The pieces began to coalesce, forming a horrifying mosaic. The directed evolution, the strange genetic markers, the subtle psychic resonance, it all pointed to one terrifying possibility. Kroot was not simply allowing his kindred to adapt. He was actively, intelligently shaping them. And the source of this shaping intelligence, Armir suspected, was something far more ancient and sinister than mere Kroot intuition. He began to focus his research on Kroot himself. He analyzed archived communiques, subtle inflections in his voice, his preferred deployment patterns. He noticed the Shaper's uncanny ability to identify worlds rich in unique genetic material. A deep dread settled upon Armir. The Kroot were supposed to be integrated into the greater good, to be uplifted. But under Kroot, it seemed they were being twisted into something else entirely, something designed for a purpose Armir could not yet fully grasp, but which he instinctively knew was utterly antithetical to all that the Toe stood for. He knew he had to act, even if it meant risking his career, or worse, his life. The Kroot, he realized with a chilling certainty, were becoming something far more dangerous than just savage auxiliaries. They were becoming a weapon, wielded by an intelligence that was no longer purely Kroot. The very essence of Kroot, kindred life, was tradition, a delicate balance between the pragmatic needs of survival and the revered ancestral ways. Consumption was sacred, a ritual of genetic remembrance and calculated evolution. Yet, under Shaper Kroot's increasingly radical leadership, this balance began to fray, tearing at the intricate social fabric of the Kroot. The first whispers of discontent began quietly. Among the older Kroot, the seasoned veterans who had served under Kroot for centuries. They respected his wisdom, his tactical prowess, but they felt a fundamental shift in the kindred's core. The diet was becoming more indiscriminate. The targets of consumption chosen not for specific, beneficial traits that reinforced existing Kroot physiology, but for raw, extreme genetic volatility. They had always avoided creatures with unstable or overtly corrupting genomes, instinctively knowing the dangers of genetic pollution. Now, Kroot seemed to actively seek them out. "The Shaper drives us to strange feasts," muttered an elderly Kroot warrior, his quills drooping, to a small circle of his trusted kin. "We consume creatures that twist the body, that poison the spirit. The path of our ancestors was cautious, deliberate. This is haste. The physical changes were the most obvious source of unease. While many Kroot proudly displayed minor adaptations, hardened scales, sharper claws, the mutations within the Kahrok were growing grotesque, too rapid, too alien. Younger Kroot, particularly those who followed Karho's direct command, began to exhibit alarming traits. Some developed secondary, vestigial limbs that twitched uncontrollably. Others found their skin becoming unnaturally pale and rubbery, or inversely, covered in rigid, insectoid chitin. A few even had their quills coalesce into a single bony crest, or their beaks lengthen and split into mandibles. These were not the controlled, integrated adaptations of true Kroot evolution. They were disfiguring, discordant alterations, an uncontrolled genetic cacophony. The psychological impact was equally profound. The constant intake of virulent genetic material, especially the psychic echoes that still subtly emanated from Karo, began to erode the Kroot's innate sense of self. Their predatory instincts, once honed and controlled, grew sharper, more ravenous, bordering on feral. They became more aggressive, less patient, sometimes even turning on each other during training exercises with an unsettling ferocity. The ancestral memories, usually a comforting chorus, were now punctuated by alien whispers, cold imperatives, and a pervasive, unsatiable hunger that left them agitated and restless. Kroxagor Grextal, Karo's ancient and loyal companion, felt the growing schism most keenly. He had stood by Karo through countless battles, trusted his Shaper's judgment implicitly. But he watched the transformation of his kindred with a heavy heart. He saw the gleam in the eyes of the younger warriors, a hunger that was not purely Kroot. He witnessed the subtle shift in Karo's demeanor, the increasing detachment, the way he viewed individual Kroot as components rather than kin. Grextal confronted Karo in the privacy of their kindred ship's cargo hold, where Karo often spent hours poring over Tau star charts and genetic readouts. "Shaper," Grextal rumbled, his voice low and troubled. "The kindred is changing too fast. The young ones grow twisted. Their minds are agitated. This path, it deviates from the ancestors. Is this truly the way to strength?" Karo turned, his eyes dark and ancient, betraying no emotion. "Strength comes from adaptation, Grextal. The galaxy does not wait for slow evolution. The Tau are blind, the Imperium stagnant. only those who can become anything, endure anything, will survive. He gestured to a holographic star chart. We consume, yes, but we also learn. We are becoming more. The pain, the changes, they are the birth pangs of a greater form. But at what cost? Grextal persisted, rare defiance in his voice. We lose ourselves. We lose our Krootness. Are we to become mere mimicry? Are we to become something else entirely? Cairo's gaze hardened. We become what is necessary. The old ways were for a galaxy that no longer exists. The ancestors would understand. True strength is not clinging to what was, but embracing what must be. His voice held an unnerving certainty, a cold logic that chilled Grextal to his core. Despite Cairo's conviction, the discontent festered. A faction of traditionalist Kroot, led by a revered elder named Qatar, began to subtly resist Cairo's directives. They would subtly alter their consumption, avoiding the more volatile genetic material, or deliberately seeking out creatures known for their resilience and purity of form. They clung to the ancient Kroot ways, secretly hoping to maintain a semblance of their original identity. This internal schism, though not yet violent, created a subtle tension within the Kahrok. Cairo, acutely aware of the resistance, dealt with it with chilling efficiency. He isolated the traditionalists, assigning them to less critical, often more dangerous campaigns, where their purity would be tested against overwhelming odds. He promoted younger, more ambitious Kroot, who eagerly embraced the accelerated evolutionary path, rewarding their radical changes with greater influence. He subtly shifted his personal guard, ensuring only the most fanatically loyal, and often the most grotesquely mutated, were within his inner circle. The whispers of heresy, of Cairo abandoning the true Kroot path, began to spread beyond the kindred. Other Kroot auxiliaries, operating with the Tau, heard the rumors of the Kahrok's unsettling changes. The Tau, though unaware of the deeper internal conflict, noticed the growing physical disparities between Cairo's kindred and others, dismissing it as unique Kroot cultural practices. The Kahrok kindred was becoming a paradox, militarily superior, yet internally fractured. Cairo, driven by the ceaseless, cold imperative of the defunct patriarch's memories, pushed them further and further. He saw the descent as weakness, a genetic impurity to be excised. He believed he was forging a new, stronger Kroot, a species capable of rivaling even the Tyranids in their adaptability, but one that would retain a shred of individual will. But in his relentless pursuit of this vision, he was sacrificing not just individual Kroot lives, but the very soul of his kindred, paving the way for a horrifying, irrevocable transformation. The grim path he trod was taking them not towards a glorious evolution, but towards a biological abyss, the feral orc. Wah! On the asteroid cluster of Gorzog's Maw was a churning vortex of crude green savagery, a threat that had swiftly overwhelmed several Tau scouting parties and promised to bottleneck a crucial expansion lane. For the Tau High Command, it was a problem to be eradicated with overwhelming force and strategic precision. For Kerho, it was a biological bounty, an unparalleled opportunity. Oit, with their crude yet incredibly resilient physiology, their fungal nature, and their unique Wah energy field, presented a genetic enigma. They were tough, adaptable, and their very psychic presence warped reality to their will. Kerho knew that the consumption of orc genetic material, if properly guided, could provide a monumental leap in the Kahrok's directed evolution. The sheer volume of orc biomass, combined with their unique fungal adaptability, promised a harvest unlike any before. The Tau deployed a significant portion of the Kahrok kindred alongside fire-cast cadres, expecting a protracted and brutal attrition war. Karo, however, saw beyond mere attrition. He directed his Kroot warriors to target specific orc subtypes, the burly knobs for their sheer physical strength and rapid healing, the cunning mechs for their bizarre bioengineering aptitude, a trait not visible on a basic genetic level, but subtly felt through the patriarch's lingering psychic echoes, and even the lowly Gretchen for their incredible resilience to harsh environments and rapid reproduction cycles. The battle for Gorzog's Maw was a maelstrom of violence. The orcs swarmed, their crude weapons tearing through Tau fire lines. But the Kahrok, under Kerho's direct, almost telepathic command, fought with an unprecedented, focused ferocity. They bypassed the main orc lines, striking deep into their crude strongholds, specifically targeting the largest concentrations of orc biomass. Kerho led by example, his own form now a terrifying amalgam of Kroot and something indefinable. His skin had grown thicker, almost scale-like, and his movements were a blur of coordinated precision. He was faster, stronger, and his senses were so acute he seemed to predict orc attacks before they happened. His kindred, a wave of green and bone, tore through the orc hordes. But the consumption on Gorzog's Maw was unlike any before. Under Kerho's relentless direction, the Kroot gorged themselves, not in a leisurely post-battle feast, but in the heat of combat, tearing flesh from still twitching orc bodies. The sheer volume of ingested biomass, coupled with the unique, volatile orc genetics, triggered a horrifying accelerated mutation throughout the Kahrok. Within hours, visible changes began to manifest. Kroot warriors began to grow thicker, crude, chitinous plates across their backs and shoulders, mirroring orc armor. Their bone structures became denser, almost rock-like, giving them a ponderous, brutish strength. Some developed additional, rudimentary mouths filled with blunt, grinding teeth, perfect for tearing at orc sinew. Their quills, once fine and feathered, stiffened into coarse, stubby growths, sometimes even fusing into bony cranial protrusions. A disturbing, sickly green tinge began to permeate their skin, and their eyes, once sharp and intelligent, sometimes took on a dull, reddish gleam. The Kroxigor Grextal watched in horror as his kin transformed around him. He saw warriors he had known for decades twist into grotesque parodies of Kroot and orc. Their minds, too, seemed affected. The subtle psychic field of the Wah. Energy, coupled with the raw, brutal orc genetic memory, infused them with an aggressive, almost mindless bloodlust. They fought with a chilling disregard for their own lives, their Kroot battle cries replaced by guttural snarls and savage roars. The victory was complete. The orc wog was utterly annihilated, their crude fortresses reduced to rubble, their biomass consumed. The Kahrok kindred emerged from the smoking wreckage, battered but victorious. However, they were no longer truly Kroot. When the Tau cleanup crews arrived, expecting to find the usual Kroot auxiliaries salvaging weapons and eating fallen foes, they were met with a sight that sent shivers of unease down their collective spines. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the orcs, but also with bizarre, half-formed Kroot carcasses, those who had consumed too much, too fast, their bodies unable to handle the deluge of genetic information, warping into hideous, non-viable forms. The surviving Kahrok were disturbingly different. Many bore crude, bony growths, their skin discolored, their movements heavier, more deliberate. Their eyes held a predatory glint that was far more savage than usual. A fire warrior. Shasui, his pulse rifle still warm from battle, cautiously approached a group of Kahrok warriors who were, with disturbing efficiency, finishing off the last pockets of orc resistance. He saw a Kroot with a grotesque, bulging arm, its hand ending in a fused, bone-bladed club. Another possessed a jaw that had split to reveal multiple rows of jagged teeth. They responded to his query not with their usual guttural Kroot speech, but with a series of sharp clicks and hisses, their eyes fixing on him with an unnerving, almost possessive intensity. The Toe observers, accustomed to Kroot oddities, tried to rationalize it. Extreme environmental adaptation, one Earth-caste xenobiologist nervously noted in his data slate, triggered by unique orc biosignature interactions. But even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. This wasn't adaptation. It was transmutation. Cairo, standing amidst the transformed kindred, seemed to radiate a cold satisfaction. He had pushed them to the brink, and they had not broken. They had changed. The orc genes had imbued them with raw resilience, a terrifying capacity for regeneration, and an almost primal, unyielding aggression. He knew that the cost had been immense, not just in lives, but in the purity of his kindred's form. But the goal, the ultimate evolutionary apotheosis, was now tantalizingly close. The victory at Gorzog's maw was indeed a Pyrrhic one. The Tau had secured their expansion lane, but they had also unleashed a transformed auxiliary onto the galaxy, a monstrous hybrid whose loyalty, once unquestioned, now seemed to be subtly, chillingly shifting. The Kahrok kindred had taken a horrifying leap, becoming a new kind of predator. Their hunger, now refined and guided by the chilling intellect of their shaper, a hunger for genetic mastery that dwarfed the simple wow of the orcs and the greater good of the Tau. The relentless drive of Shaper Karho was not simply towards genetic assimilation. It was towards enlightenment, a profound understanding of organic evolution gleaned from the vast, cold intellect of the defunct Genestealer patriarch. The Tyrannid mind, as glimpsed through the patriarch's echoes, did not merely consume. It catalogued, it understood, and it synthesized. To truly master the genetic code, Karho realized, one needed not just brute force consumption, but also the tools and the knowledge to manipulate it with surgical precision. This new hunger for knowledge, for sophisticated biological engineering, began to manifest as another subtle redirection of Tau efforts. Karho began to speak of ancient Xenos technologies, of forgotten civilizations whose advanced biosciences could offer unparalleled insights into life itself. He painted vivid, if vague, pictures of technologies that could accelerate growth, mend the broken form, or even unlock hidden potentials within the very essence of a species. These were concepts that resonated deeply with the Earth caste's eternal quest for scientific advancement and the ethereal's desire for ultimate control over their domain. His specific target was a cluster of nebulae on the fringes of the Tao-claimed sector, a region designated the Veil of Whispers. It was largely unexplored, shrouded in electromagnetic interference, and deemed strategically unimportant by the Tau, save for vague, unconfirmed reports of ancient Xenos ruins. Kroot, however, had gleaned specific coordinates and cryptic descriptions from the Patriarch's memories, faint echoes of a vast pre-Tyranid bioarc, a repository of genetic marvels, a legacy of a forgotten race of biological architects. The Tyranids, in their endless migrations, had encountered it millennia ago, bypassed it as inefficient to consume directly, but its information had been catalogued. Kroot presented his case to the Tau command with a mixture of Kroot intuition and carefully chosen, strategically vague references to potential Tau technological breakthroughs. The ancestors speak of places where life itself was sculpted, he rasped, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity, where forms were made, not born. Such knowledge could greatly aid the greater good. Imagine a Kroot kindred, perfectly adapted to any world at will. The latter prospect of controllable, optimized auxiliaries was a tantalizing lure for the Tau. Despite initial skepticism from the Earth caste, who prioritized tangible mineral resources over speculative ancient biotech, Kroot's continued influence and the undeniable battlefield prowess of the grotesquely evolved Kroot kindred swayed the ethereals. A deep space exploration fleet, accompanied by a contingent of the Kroot, was dispatched into the Veil of Whispers. Navigating the nebulae was arduous. The electromagnetic interference played havoc with Tau sensors, and swirling dust clouds hid countless dangers. But Kroot, now possessing an almost supernatural navigational sense inherited from the Patriarch's cosmic wanderings, guided the fleet with unnerving precision. He seemed to know the safest paths, the hidden shortcuts, leading them deeper into the labyrinthine nebula where no Tau vessel had ventured before. After weeks of perilous travel, they emerged into a small, anomalous void pocket. Before them floated an object of impossible scale and alien design. It was a vast, organic-looking structure, a derelict Xenos bioarc, shaped like a colossal, many-winged insect in the void. Its surface was a mosaic of dull gray-green, plates, fused seams, and ancient, crumbling bioluminescent veins. It had been dormant for untold millennia, yet its sheer presence radiated an aura of profound, forgotten life. The Tau Earth caste expeditionary teams were awestruck. Their scans showed complex internal structures, vast chambers, and dormant biological systems. It was clearly an ark, designed to preserve and study untold numbers of species. Kroot, leading his transformed Kahrok warriors, was the first to breach its ancient hull. The air inside was still, sterile, and faintly sweet, a preserved atmosphere from an era long past. What they found within the bio-ark surpassed even Kroot's expectations. Miles of twisting corridors led to vast cryostasis chambers filled with countless species, perfectly preserved, their genetic codes waiting to be awakened. More importantly, they discovered the remnants of the bioarchitect's laboratories. Intricate consoles, arcane genetic sequencers, and vast data banks, miraculously still dormant and partially functional despite the eons. These were not weapons of war, but tools for the manipulation of life itself. While the Tau focused on cataloging the preserved species and trying to decipher the alien technology, Kroot and his inner circle of mutated Kroot had their own agenda. Guided by the Patriarch's memories, Kroot located the heart of the bio-ark's data core, a pulsating, crystalline library of genetic information. He didn't understand the intricate alien language, but the genestealer memory allowed him to instinctively extract the fundamental principles. Advanced genetic splicing techniques, protocols for directed evolutionary cascades, even methods for stabilizing previously incompatible genetic material. He instructed his most loyal Kroot to carefully extract crystalline data shards, ostensibly for Tau research, but secretly for his own use. He absorbed a small portion of the data directly, a jolt of pure scientific knowledge flooding his already overtaxed mind. It was a different kind of consumption, a mental one, but just as potent. He saw new possibilities, ways to refine the crude, brutal changes he had wrought upon his kindred, to impose a true, intelligent order upon the chaos of rapid evolution. He now possessed not just the hunger, but the knowledge to truly become a biological architect. The Tau considered the discovery of the bio-ark a monumental success for the greater good. Its preserved genetic material and advanced, if cryptic, biotechnology promised untold benefits. They planned meticulous studies, aiming to integrate these findings into their own scientific endeavors. Kroot, ever the silent manipulator, offered his Kroot insight to expedite their access to certain databanks, always steering them towards areas that provided him with more tools, more understanding. As the Tau diligently worked to unravel the mysteries of the bio-ark, Kroot began to experiment in secret. Using the rudimentary tools he had salvaged and the vast knowledge he had assimilated, he started to refine the genetic cocktail within his closest kin. The wild, chaotic mutations began to stabilize, becoming more purposeful, more integrated. He was no longer just a predator consuming genetic material. He was a sculptor of life, guided by the terrifying, cold logic of the great devourer and the forgotten knowledge of an ancient bio-civilization. The grim hope that flickered in Karo's heart was not for the Tau, but for his own kindred, for a terrifying new destiny forged in the crucible of stolen knowledge and monstrous ambition. The secrets gleaned from the ancient Xenos bioarc were a torrent of revelation for Karho. The Genestealer Patriarch's echoes had provided the foundational hunger and the raw data. But the bioarchitect's technology offered the refinement, the precision. It was the difference between a ravenous beast tearing flesh and a master chef crafting a delicate yet potent feast. Karo now understood not just what to consume, but how to integrate, stabilize, and direct the genetic material within his kindred. His immediate goal was ambitious, terrifying even to contemplate: to create a Kroot that could absorb and master any genetic code without being overwhelmed, one that could actively control its own evolution, discarding detrimental traits while retaining beneficial ones. He envisioned a Kroot that was not merely a reactive adapter, but a proactive shapeshifter, a true apex predator, capable of becoming the ultimate life form. He began his most dangerous and profound experiments on himself and a carefully selected, fanatically loyal cadre of Kroot. These were Kroot who had fully embraced his radical vision, their bodies already a testament to the accelerated, often grotesque, mutations he had unleashed. They were no longer simply warriors. They were living canvases for his grand design. In the deepest, most secure sections of the bioarc, far from Tau scrutiny, Karo set up his secret laboratory. Using modified Tau scanners and the salvaged Xenos genetic sequencers, he began to meticulously analyze the genetic material of the bioarc's preserved specimens. He learned to identify stabilizing sequences, genetic markers that allowed for greater compatibility between wildly disparate species. He discovered catalytic triggers, dormant genes that, once activated, could accelerate specific evolutionary pathways without the chaotic side effects he had previously witnessed. His first breakthrough was the development of what he termed a genetic anchor. This was a complex, self-replicating gene sequence derived from the most stable and resilient organisms within the bioarc, which he introduced into the genome of his chosen cadre. This anchor acted as a kind of biological firewall, preventing foreign genetic material from overwhelming the Kroot's core physiology. It allowed them to consume volatile material and integrate only the desired traits, without the risk of uncontrolled mutation or mental degradation. The horrifying, random changes that had plagued the kindred during the Orc campaign now ceased for his chosen few. The results were astonishing. Karo's inner circle began to change, not wildly, but purposefully. A warrior might absorb the enhanced musculature of an ancient megafauna, but without the corresponding increase in weight. Another might gain the bioluminescent camouflage of a deep-sea predator, but only when actively desired. Their bodies became fluid, responsive, capable of rapid, directed cellular restructuring on a scale previously unimaginable. Crucially, Karo refined the integration of the patriarch's psychic echoes. He didn't want the raw, overwhelming hunger of the tyrannid, but rather its strategic insight, its understanding of biological efficiency, and its ability to subtly influence prey. He developed a way to filter these echoes, transforming them from a chaotic roar into a controlled hum, a constant stream of tactical and genetic data. His cadre, now linked to this filtered psychic resonance, gained an uncanny sense of environmental awareness, a precognitive edge in combat, and a chilling understanding of enemy weaknesses. He showed his cadre visions, not of the Kroot past, but of a terrifying future. He projected images directly into their minds. Kroot warriors shape-shifting mid-battle, growing razor-sharp blades from their arms to cleave through armor, or hardening their skin into impenetrable shields against laser fire. He showed them a Kroot that was truly unbound, a species that could become anything, anywhere, a hunter that adapted not over generations, but within moments. He spoke of surpassing the tyrannids themselves, of becoming masters of their own evolution, rather than mindless drones. This vision, far from the ancestral ways, resonated deeply with the ambitious and already heavily mutated Kroot. They saw not a loss of identity, but an apotheosis. They became his zealous disciples, willing to undergo any physical or mental trial he imposed. This fanatical loyalty, nurtured by Karo's potent blend of genetic manipulation and psychic conditioning, created a terrifying inner circle. A proto-species distinct even from the rest of the Kahrok. One of his most promising recruits was a young Kroot named Scaris. Scaris had, during the Orc campaign, developed a grotesque, multi-jointed arm and a tendency towards berserker rages. Under Karho's new regime, Scaris's mutations stabilized. His multi-jointed arm became a tool of terrifying precision and strength, capable of shifting its form from a crushing blunt instrument to a bladed spear. His berserker rage was channeled, becoming a focused tactical ferocity. Scaris became the embodiment of Karo's new Kroot, a living testament to the terrifying potential of controlled evolution. The Tau, still diligently cataloging species and attempting to reverse engineer the bioarc's general technology, remained oblivious to the true nature of Karo's work. They saw his cadre as simply the most highly evolved of his Kroot, a testament to the unpredictable nature of their Xenos auxiliaries. They praised Karo's insightful contributions to understanding the bioarc, unknowingly handing him more and more of the tools he needed. Kerho knew this glimmer of hope was a dangerous one, a path fraught with unseen perils and unimaginable costs. He was walking a fine line, balancing the raw power of the Tyranid imperative with the advanced science of the bioarchitects and the dwindling vestiges of his own Kroot identity. But the vision was clear. A new species, born from the ashes of the old, capable of facing any foe, any challenge, a true master of life and death in a galaxy of endless war. The whispers of the past had given him a future, a terrifying, glorious future for the kindred that would transcend mere survival. With his inner circle of genetically anchored and highly adaptable, Kroot solidified, and his understanding of directed evolution vastly deepened by the bioarc's knowledge. Karo sought the ultimate crucible. He needed a true testing ground, a world far from Tau interference, where his nascent, hyper-evolving kindred could be pushed to their absolute limits without external scrutiny. The planet Xylos, a shrouded death world nestled in a largely unexplored nebula, fit his requirements perfectly. Xylos was a nightmare of biological excess. Its primary continents were vast, fungal forests where spores constantly drifted, inducing hyperadaptation in any creature that inhaled them. Its oceans teemed with colossal, predatory leviathans that could change their physiology to match any prey. Its mountain ranges housed intricate cave systems filled with crystalline fauna that could drain life energy. Most crucially, Xylos was home to a newly discovered, highly aggressive xenofauna species, the Chthonic Weepers. The Chthonic Weepers were a terrifying subterranean species, vaguely insectoid in form, capable of burrowing through solid rock and possessing an unnerving psionic shriek that could paralyze prey. They exhibited rapid, localized evolution, developing chitinous armor, venomous stingers, or razor-sharp claws in response to threats. They were, in essence, a natural equivalent of Karo's engineered Kroot, a species constantly adapting to survive in an eternally hostile environment. For Karho, they were the perfect sparring partner, a mirror against which his kindred could truly learn to master their new abilities. Kero presented Xylos to the Toe Command as a strategic resource world, rich in unique minerals, locked away by an insurmountable biosphere, and a breeding ground for a highly dangerous, uncontrolled xenofauna that posed a potential threat to nearby Toe colony worlds. He stressed the need for a contained, long-term pacification campaign, emphasizing the Kahrok's unparalleled expertise in such environments. The Toe, grateful for his strategic foresight and eager to eliminate potential threats, readily agreed, committing the entire Kahrok kindred to a lengthy deployment on Xylos, with minimal Tau oversight, precisely as Karho had intended. Upon landing on Xylos, the Kahrok established a heavily fortified forward operating base in a relatively stable volcanic caldera. From this redoubt, Karho unleashed his transformed warriors. The initial engagements with the Chthonic Weepers were brutal. The Weepers' psionic shriek caused immense pain and confusion, and their rapid adaptation made them difficult to counter. Many Kroot, especially those who had not yet received the genetic anchor or precise conditioning, fell victim to the Weepers' evolving forms. Casualties were high, but Karho remained detached, observing, learning. He sent out specific scouting parties, often his loyal cadre, to engage the Weepers. When a Weeper developed acid-spitting glands in response to Kroot melee attacks, Karho immediately directed his cadre to consume those specific glands, integrating the acid resistance and, more importantly, the knowledge of how to produce such an organic weapon. When another Weeper evolved a dense, psychic-resistant carapace, the Kroot would consume it, strengthening their own mental defenses against the Weeper's shrieks. The planet became a gigantic, living laboratory. Karho no longer relied on simple consumption. He guided his kindred like a conductor leading an orchestra. He would point out specific traits to absorb, specific environmental pressures to adapt against. He used the insights from the bioarc to accelerate these adaptations, sometimes even providing synthesized genetic markers to his cadre to kickstart a desired evolutionary pathway. The Kahrok kindred, under this relentless pressure and directed evolution, became a terrifying force. Those who survived the early trials emerged as true shapeshifters. Their quills could harden into obsidian spikes. Their skin could mimic the camouflage of Xylos's fungal forests. Their claws could extend into diamond-hard blades capable of piercing Weeper chitin. They learned to anticipate the Weeper's adaptations, evolving countermeasures even before the threat fully manifested. Their psychic link, a refinement of the patriarch's essence, allowed them to coordinate with silent, chilling efficiency, turning the Weeper's own psionic attacks against them, causing internal neurological chaos among the xenofauna. Grexital, once a loyal but increasingly concerned companion, was now a formidable example of Karho's success. His Kroxigor frame, already immense, had grown even larger, adorned with natural chitinous plating that shimmered with an unsettling iridescence. His roar could now disrupt the Weeper's psionic shrieks, and his massive fists, tipped with bone blades, tore through their evolved forms with terrifying ease. He still harbored private reservations about the path Karho had chosen, but the sheer, undeniable effectiveness of their new forms was a powerful argument. The Tau, receiving sparse, heavily redacted reports from Karho, were cautiously optimistic. The reports spoke of significant progress in xenofauna containment and unprecedented Kroot adaptability. They saw the long war on Xylos as a necessary, if costly, enterprise, keeping a dangerous threat away from their core worlds. They were blind to the true nature of the pacification. It was not a war of eradication, but a war of refinement, a brutal forging of a new, terrifying species. On Xylos, the line between hunter and hunted blurred. The Kahrok were no longer just Kroot warriors. They were evolving entities, biological weapons honed on the forge of a death world. Their every encounter with the chthonic Weepers, a lesson in accelerated adaptation. Karho watched them with a grim satisfaction. They were still not perfect, still not the ultimate life form he envisioned, but they were closer. And every scream of a dying Weeper, every crunch of consumed chitin, brought them one step closer to that terrifying, glorious apotheosis. The long war on Xylos was just the beginning of a genetic revolution. Kroxigor, Grexistal was a living relic, a testament to the old ways of the Kahrok kindred. His skin was scarred with the marks of countless battles, his massive frame forged in 100 different biospheres, his mind a repository of centuries of Kroot ancestral memories. He had fought beside Karho when the Shaper was but a young, ambitious warrior, and he had witnessed Karho's rise, his innovations, and now his terrifying transformation. Grextal's loyalty was a deep-rooted, primal bond forged in blood and shared history. But even the deepest roots could be strained by the weight of unimaginable change. He watched the kindred on Xylos, a swirling vortex of directed evolution, with a growing sense of dread. The younger Kroot, those who had never known the gentle, deliberate pace of traditional Kroot evolution, embraced the rapid, often horrifying, changes with zeal. They boasted of their new forms, their shifting limbs, their hardened scales, their psychic whispers. But Grextal saw the cost. He saw the flickering, distant look in their eyes, a predatory gleam that lacked the familiar spark of Kroot cunning and wit. He saw the way their voices, once capable of intricate Kroot song, were now often reduced to guttural growls and sharp clicks, betraying a diminished capacity for complex thought. He saw their interactions with each other, less camaraderie, more a detached assessment of genetic potential, a cold calculus of utility. The Kroot soul, that intangible essence of their species, seemed to be eroding, replaced by an alien, consuming imperative. Grextal himself had undergone profound changes. His Kroxigor strength was now legendary, capable of shattering solid rock. His chitinous plating, once a subtle adaptation, now formed a near impenetrable armor. He possessed an uncanny resilience to Xylos's myriad toxins and a deep earth sense that allowed him to track the chthonic weepers even through kilometers of rock. He was Karho's most potent weapon, a living embodiment of the Shaper's vision. Yet, with every new adaptation, a part of him felt diminished, his Kroot identity slowly consumed by the relentless march of engineered perfection. He remembered the old traditions, the sacred feasts where memories of the fallen were shared, where stories of heroism and sacrifice echoed through the kindred. Now, the feasts were clinical, almost surgical. Kroot would consume specific organs, specific tissues, under Karho's direction. Their minds often overwhelmed by a deluge of raw genetic data rather than a coherent memory. The joy of the hunt, the communion with nature, was replaced by a grim, utilitarian drive for genetic acquisition. One night, under the lurid purple glow of Xylos's double moons, Grextal found himself observing a group of younger Kroot attempting to integrate the psionic abilities of a captured chthonic weeper. One warrior began to seize, his body arching, his quills erupting in a shower of sparks, his eyes rolling back in his head as a raw, untamed psychic energy surged through him. He screamed, a sound that was not Kroot. Then his head exploded in a shower of blood and brain matter. The other Kroot, rather than showing grief or horror, moved in to consume the intact portions of the deceased, analyzing the failure, seeking to understand the genetic flaw. Grextal roared, a primal sound of anguish and fury that echoed through the caldera. The younger Kroot froze, turning their unnaturally glowing eyes towards him. What have we become? He rumbled, his voice thick with pain. This is not the Kroot way. This is madness. We consume, yes, but we retain our essence. This turns us into the very things we hunt. The shaper Karo appeared from the shadows, his presence a chilling force. His form was now an intricate tapestry of adapted traits, his movements fluid and precise, his eyes holding an ancient, alien wisdom. Grextal, he rasped, his voice calm, yet edged with cold authority. The path of evolution is not for the weak of will. We shed what is unnecessary. The essence of the Kroot is adaptability, not stagnation. This one was too weak to integrate the power. A necessary loss. A loss of soul, Grextal countered, his massive fists clenching. You speak of strength, Shaper, but you forge monsters. You speak of greater forms, but you strip us of our Krootness. We are becoming soulless husks, driven by a hunger that is not our own. Cairo stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. And what is Krootness, old friend? A collection of inherited traits? A set of customs? The galaxy burns. The Tyranids approach. The Imperium stifles. The Toe are blind. We must transcend. We must become the masters of our own destiny, not slaves to a static past. He extended a hand, and Grextal saw the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of the bones beneath the skin, forming a single, razor-sharp claw. Join me, truly, Grextal. Embrace the potential. Leave behind the weakness of sentiment. Grextal looked into his shaper's eyes, and for the first time he saw not the ancient comrade he had revered, but a cold, calculating intellect driven by an alien imperative. He saw the reflection of the defunct patriarch, subtly guiding Karho's every move, twisting his ambition into something monstrous. He understood then that Karho was not entirely lost, but he was no longer fully himself. He was a vessel, a conduit for a terrifying, singular vision. His loyalty, once absolute, fractured. Grextal saw the ultimate price of Karho's ambition, the eradication of the Kroot soul, the reduction of his kindred to mere biological tools. He knew he could not stop Karho alone, but he also knew he could not allow this abomination to consume all that was left of his people. A grim determination settled in his heart. He would continue to serve, to fight, but he would also watch, and he would seek a way to preserve the true essence of the Kroot, even if it meant defying the very shaper he had sworn to protect. His burden was immense, a silent battle against the encroaching darkness that sought to redefine his entire species. The war on Xylos had raged for cycles, a grinding, brutal conflict that served as Karo's perfect crucible. The chthonic weepers, though formidable, were slowly being broken, their rapid adaptations always countered by the Kahrok's even faster, directed evolution. Karo's kindred was on the cusp of becoming the ultimate life form he envisioned, a species capable of mastering its own biology. Then, the galaxy intruded. The imperial crusade of the righteous spear, spearheaded by the fanatical zeal of the Blood Gorgons, Space Marine chapter, and supported by regiments of the Astra Militarum, burst into the sector with a singular, unyielding purpose: to cleanse the nascent Tau Empire from imperial space. Xylos, a remote, death-shrouded world on the very edge of the contested territory, had escaped immediate detection. But fate, ever cruel, had other plans. A stray imperial probe, dispatched to scour the periphery for lingering Xenos threats, detected the energy signatures of the Kahrok's forward operating base. Within weeks, the planet was designated a Xenos infestation point, and a significant Imperial task force was diverted. The heavens above Xylos darkened with the arrival of blocky Imperial warships, their Gothic prows pointed accusingly at the fungal forests below. Karo had anticipated external threats, but the sheer scale and suddenness of the Imperial assault caught him by surprise. His kindred, while immensely powerful, was still a work in progress. They were adapted for a long, grinding war of biological attrition against an indigenous foe, not a full-spectrum assault by the galaxy's most formidable human war machine. The orbital bombardment began first, a terrifying rain of macro-cannon fire and cyclonic torpedoes that scorched vast swaths of Xylos, reducing fungal forests to ash and tearing craters into the volatile landscape. The Kahrok's fortified caldera base, designed to repel xenofauna, buckled under the sustained assault. Casualties mounted rapidly, as Kroot warriors, despite their new resilience, were simply atomized by the overwhelming firepower. Then came the ground invasion. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, disgorging heavily armored space marines directly into the heart of Karo's territory. Valkyrie gunships rained lasfire and missiles, while columns of Lehman Russ tanks rumbled through the devastated landscape, their guns spitting death. The Imperial forces were merciless, their only objective to eradicate all Xenos life. The Karok fought back with a ferocity born of desperation and their new, terrifying capabilities. Kroot shapeshifters melted into the scorched earth, ambushing unsuspecting Imperial patrols, their evolving forms allowing them to bypass heavy armor or unleash bioacid sprays that dissolved ceramite. Grexital, a living battering ram, plunged into the Space Marine lines, his adapted form shrugging off bolt gun fire as he tore through power armor with his immense, chitin-bladed fists. But the Imperium was relentless. For every Space Marine felled, a dozen more advanced. For every tank destroyed, another rolled forward. The Kahrok were pushed back, their numbers dwindling, their carefully cultivated evolutionary path seemingly destined for extinction. Yet, there was another, more insidious threat emerging, one that attacked Karo from within. The intense psychic emanations of the Imperial forces, the fervent prayers of the faithful, the unwavering faith of the Space Marines, the raw, uncontrolled fear of the Guardsmen, began to resonate with the dormant Genestealer Patriarch's memories within Karho's mind. The thin veil he had erected, the genetic anchor he had cultivated, began to tear. The psychic echoes, once filtered and controlled, now surged into his consciousness with renewed virulence. The cold, logical hunger of the Tyrannid returned, stronger than ever, amplified by the raw psychic energy of the Imperial Crusade. He saw images of worlds consumed, of biomass harvested, of the hive mind's inevitable triumph, the Patriarch's imperative to replicate, to subvert, to infest, returned with a chilling, overwhelming force, threatening to subsume Karho's individuality entirely. He staggered, a guttural cry escaping his lips, a sound of agony and internal struggle. His enhanced senses became a torment. Every explosion, every scream, every thought of his kindred, a piercing agony. His body, caught between his Kroot identity, his engineered adaptations, and the encroaching Tyrannid essence, began to contort. Chitinous plates grew and receded, limbs twitched and elongated, and his vision blurred with visions of a cosmic maw. Grexital, seeing his shaper fall, roared and fought his way towards him, a desperate hope in his heart that he could pull Karho back from the brink. But Karho was wrestling with a foe far more ancient and powerful than any Imperial Space Marine. The Tyrannid fragment, sensing an opportunity to reassert its will, began to exert its dominance, twisting Karho's formidable intellect towards its own primal purpose. This was Karho's darkest hour, trapped between the relentless, purifying fire of the Imperium and the insidious, consuming will of the Tyrannid hive mind within him. His grand vision of a self-mastered evolution, seemed destined to collapse into either genetic extinction or mindless assimilation. The crucible had become a pyre, threatening to burn away everything he had fought to create, leaving behind only ash or a monster. The battlefield was a swirling maelstrom of destruction, the air thick with the acrid scent of ozone, promethium, and burning flesh. Imperial bolters ripped through the mutated ranks of the Kahrok, while the Kroot, driven to desperate ferocity, tore apart space marines with chitinous claws and bioacidic sprays. Karo, at the heart of the storm, was no longer merely a shaper. He was a nexus of agony, his mind a battleground between the tyrannid imperative and the last vestiges of his Kroot will. The patriarch's essence, stirred by the psychic maelstrom of the imperial crusade, surged, attempting to reassert dominance. Karo saw visions of worlds consumed, of biomass assimilated, of the chilling, beautiful efficiency of the hive mind. He felt the overwhelming hunger, the instinct to propagate, to infest. His carefully constructed genetic anchors, his filtered psychic links, all threatened to collapse under the sheer, raw power of the tyrannid entity. His body convulsed, his quills standing rigid, then flattening against his skull as new, monstrous changes rippled through his form. His beak-like mouth elongated, then split, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that seemed too numerous for his jaw. His four-fingered hands thickened, ending in a terrifying amalgamation of Kroot claw and Genestealer talons. Grextal, a titan of fury and desperation, finally reached his shaper, carving a path through a squad of blood gorgons. He saw the horrifying transformation, the alien glow in Karho's eyes, and the barely suppressed scream of a consciousness being torn apart. "Karo!" Grextal roared, his voice thick with anguish. "Fight it! Remember the kindred! Remember the Kroot!" The words, imbued with centuries of shared history, struck a chord in Karo's fracturing mind. The Kroot ancestral memories, buried beneath layers of tyrannid logic and bio-arc data, flickered. He saw not the hive mind's triumph, but the proud, defiant faces of his ancestors, the endless struggle of his kindred to survive and evolve on their own terms. He saw the countless worlds he had guided them through, the knowledge he had painstakingly acquired, all to elevate his people, not to become a slave to another species' hunger. A guttural growl, half Kroot, half alien, tore from Karho's throat. He would not be consumed. He would not become merely another pawn of the hive mind. His vision, His ambition was to master evolution, not be mastered by it. In that moment of ultimate struggle, an unthinkable decision formed. He would embrace the ultimate sacrifice, not of his life, but of his Kroot identity, to achieve true control. With a superhuman, alien effort, Kerho pushed back against the encroaching tyrannid will. He didn't merely resist. He began to consume the raw essence of the patriarch itself, not for genetic traits, but for the fundamental patterns of its control, its psychic architecture. He turned the tyrannid's own weapon of assimilation against it, attempting to become the master of the genestealer rather than its host. A blinding flash of psychic energy erupted from Kerho, knocking Grexital back, incinerating several nearby Imperial guardsmen, and temporarily stunning even the hardened Space Marines. When the light subsided, Kerho was no longer merely a Kroot. His form was colossal, a horrific blend of every species he had ever consumed, yet undeniably singular. His skin was a shifting mosaic of chitinous plates and leathery hide, his limbs a symphony of sinew and bone. His head, once Kroot-like, had elongated into something vaguely reptilian and insectoid, adorned with a crown of bone spikes and multiple glowing eyes that radiated cold, predatory intelligence. His former beak was replaced by a maw that split into 4 mandibles, capable of ineffaceable vocalizations. He was an apotheosis, a living engine of controlled evolution. He had not merely integrated the patriarch's memory, he had become the patriarch, subsuming its will, yet retaining his own, now amplified to godlike proportions. For a fleeting moment, he was the ultimate life form he had envisioned, a biological demigod, master of his own terrifying genesis. With a piercing, multi-tonal shriek that shattered the eardrums of humans and sent waves of primal fear through the Space Marines' psycho-indoctrinated minds, Kerho lunged. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of razor claws and shifting chitin. He tore through the Imperial lines, not with mindless abandon, but with chilling, surgical precision. He targeted command structures, heavy weapons, and concentrations of high-ranking officers, unleashing directed psychic blasts that overloaded neural networks and caused minds to unravel. His transformed kindred, those who had received his genetic anchors, responded to his amplified psychic command with renewed vigor, their own mutations shifting to perfectly counter the Imperial threat. They attacked with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, their movements a reflection of Kerho's overarching will. The Imperium caught off guard by this sudden, terrifying metamorphosis and the coordinated savagery of the Kroot, began to falter. They were fighting not just a Xenos auxiliary, but a nascent, self-directed hive organism. Karo, with his newfound terrible power, had achieved what no Kroot had before. He had momentarily turned the tide against the full might of an imperial crusade. He was saving his kindred, but at the cost of his very Kroot soul, transforming into something far more monstrous than any genestealer. His sacrifice was complete, his identity utterly annihilated, replaced by the chilling, magnificent horror of a self-made god of evolution. The sudden, terrifying apotheosis of Karho shattered the imperial advance on Xylos. The blood gorgons, hardened by countless wars, found themselves facing a foe that defied all known categorizations. Karho, now a towering, monstrous entity of shifting chitin and predatory intelligence, carved a bloody swath through their ranks. His psychic will, a focused spear of agony and confusion. His mutated kindred, a living extension of his new consciousness, fought with a horrifying, synchronized precision. Each Kroot, a perfectly adapted weapon. The Imperial High Command, receiving increasingly fragmented and desperate reports of a new tyrannid threat and hyper-adaptive Xenos horrors, made a grim decision. The cost in Space Marine lives and materiel was too high. Xylos was declared an exterminatus-level threat, a contagion to be contained and purged, but not at the expense of the Greater Crusade. With a final, furious volley of orbital bombardments that scoured vast swaths of the planet, the Imperial fleet began to withdraw, leaving Xylos a burning, shattered ruin, a testament to their Pyrrhic victory. They believed they had eradicated the threat, unaware of the deeper, more insidious horror they had merely contained. The Ka-Rok kindred, though saved from total annihilation, emerged from the imperial assault as a scattered, broken remnant. Thousands had fallen to the orbital barrages and the relentless imperial ground forces. Those who survived were the most heavily mutated, the most profoundly altered by Karo's directed evolution and his final, cataclysmic psychic surge. They were no longer simply Ka-Rok. They were a new, horrifying species, their forms a grotesque fusion of Kroot, Orc, alien bio-arc specimens, and the subtle, chilling echoes of the genestealer patriarch that still resonated through Karo's monstrous form. Karho himself, his transformation complete, now moved with a chilling, detached purpose. He was no longer Shaper Karho. He was an entity of pure, directed genetic will, a living, evolving hive intelligence, his consciousness, while distinctly not the full Tyrannid hive mind, operated with a similar, cold, analytical efficiency. He gathered the surviving remnants of his kindred, guiding them deeper into the most inhospitable, radiation-soaked depths of Xylos, away from the prying eyes of any potential observer. For Grexital, the aftermath was a tragedy beyond words. He had witnessed his shaper's apotheosis, seen Karo become the monster he had so feared. He had seen the power, the terrifying beauty of a perfect, self-directed evolution. But he had also felt the cold, empty silence where Karho's Kroot soul once resided. The old shaper was gone, consumed by his own ambition, replaced by an entity that wore his shape but possessed an alien core. Grextal and a small faction of less radically altered Kroot survivors gathered apart from the main group. They clung to their Kroot identity, to the ancestral memories that still faintly whispered in their minds, a stark contrast to the overwhelming collective will that now emanated from Karho. They were horrified by what their shaper had become, and terrified of what they themselves were slowly turning into. They now understood the true meaning of Karho's ambition. It was not just to make the Kroot stronger, but to transform them into something entirely different, something utterly alien. Word of the events on Xylos eventually reached the Tau Empire, heavily filtered and distorted by the surviving imperial records. The Tau High Command was horrified. Their exceptional auxiliaries had become a hyper-adaptive Xenos plague. The Earth-caste xenobiologists, led by a now vindicated Fiovra Ramir, quickly analyzed the imperial data, confirming his worst fears about the Kahrok's accelerated, unnatural mutations. The psychic resonance, now clearly identifiable as Tyrannid in origin, finally revealed the true nature of Karho's insidious plan. The Tau immediately declared the surviving Kahrok kindred Das Teng abominations, no longer auxiliaries, but a severe Xenos threat. Expeditionary fleets were dispatched to hunt down and eradicate the remnants, a grim undertaking that filled the Tau with a profound sense of betrayal and shame. They had, in their noble pursuit of the greater good, unknowingly nurtured a monster in their midst. But the Tau were not the only ones hunting them. The psychic reverberations of Karho's transformation had traveled through the warp, reaching distant tendrils of the Tyrannid hive mind. The hive mind, recognizing a potent, if aberrant, genetic signature, was now drawn to Xylos, perceiving Karho's entity and his mutated kindred as both a rival and a potential resource. and even more dangerously, fragments of the original Genestealer cult, those who had fled Vol's scorn and spread like a cancer, now sensed the awakening of a new, albeit twisted, patriarch. They perceived Karho as their reborn god, a harbinger of the Star Children, and began to flock towards Xylos, ready to serve their new, monstrous master. The surviving Kahrok were thus caught in a terrifying three-way hunt, pursued by the unforgiving Tau, perceived as prey or resource by the burgeoning Tyrannid threat, and ironically, worshipped as a new divine by the deluded remnants of the Genestealer cult that Karho had first encountered. Xylos, a ravaged death world, became their new, horrifying sanctuary, a place where the vestiges of a once proud Kroot kindred fought for their very existence, forever altered, forever hunted. Their future was one of constant war, not for conquest or glory, but for the desperate, miserable survival of a species that had dared to play God. The grim legend of Shaper Karho and the Kahrok kindred did not end in glorious sacrifice or triumphant evolution. It devolved into a chilling, cautionary tale whispered in the shadow-haunted halls of the Tau Empire and catalogued in the forbidden archives of the Imperium. The events on Xylos marked a definitive ending to the Kroot's traditional path and the dawn of a new, horrifying threat. Karo, now an entity beyond mere Kroot, a living, evolving hive intelligence hewn from ambition and alien genetic memory, became known as the Shaper Patriarch. He commanded the surviving, profoundly mutated Kahrok from the deepest, most irradiated caverns of Xylos. His psychic will, a chilling fusion of Kroot cunning and Tyrannid hunger, directed their every movement. They were no longer individuals with ancestral memories, but extensions of his grand, monstrous design. Their forms were now utterly alien, their once distinct Kroot features replaced by grotesque combinations of chitin, multi-jointed limbs, and sensory organs that pulsed with an internal, violet light. They were Shaper-kin, a nascent subspecies driven by a primal, insatiable hunger for unique genetic material, a reflection of the Shaper Patriarch's own perfected, if terrifying, evolutionary imperative. The Tau Empire, reeling from the betrayal and the horrific implications of Karho's actions, initiated the purification mandate. All remaining Kroot kindreds across their domain were placed under intense scrutiny. Kroot auxiliary contracts, once a cornerstone of Tau military doctrine, were revised, scaled back, or outright terminated. Many Kroot, loyal to the greater good, were subjected to humiliating genetic screening and forced dietary restrictions, shattering the trust that had been built over centuries. This schism, born of Karho's ambition, irrevocably damaged the Tau's relationship with all Kroot, fostering an enduring suspicion and resentment that would plague their auxiliary forces for generations. Fiovre, once a disregarded xenobiologist, rose to prominence, becoming a leading expert on xenos contamination and genetic safeguards, his warnings now heeded with grim urgency. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Genestealer cults, drawn by the potent psychic beacon of the Shaper Patriarch, continued to flock to Xylos. They worshipped Karho as their star father, a new, ascended form of their Messiah, unaware that he merely tolerated their presence as a protective buffer and a readily available source of biomass. The Shaper Patriarch allowed them to infest the upper levels of Xylos, using their diluted fervor and biological potency as a living shield against Tau eradication efforts and a testing ground for his evolving Shaper-kin. He did not seek to propagate their species as the Tyranids would. He sought to absorb and refine their genetic legacy into his own. The Tyranid hive mind, vast and inscrutable, sensed the Shaper Patriarch's growing power. It perceived him not as a lost drone, but as an anomalous, self-directed biological entity, a deviation from its own perfect design, yet possessing a terrifying efficiency. It dispatched smaller, scouting tendrils towards Xylos, not for immediate consumption, but for analysis, for understanding this unique threat that mimicked its own hunger and adaptability, yet dared to retain an independent will. The Shaper Patriarch, in turn, sensed the encroaching tendrils, recognizing a rival force, an ultimate challenge against which he would hone his perfected kindred. The grim legacy of Shaper Karho was thus etched into the galaxy. The scattered Shaper kin, driven by an unnatural, insatiable hunger, would occasionally escape Xylos, venturing into the void. These warped Kroot, often mistaken for mutated Genestealers or new Tyranid bioforms, became a new, terrifying Xenos threat. They moved with a chilling intelligence, their forms shifting to mimic local fauna, their psychic whispers drawing in unsuspecting prey. Their only goal? The acquisition of new, volatile genetic material. They were not driven by conquest or ideology, but by the primal, perfected hunger instilled by the Shaper Patriarch. In the endless night of the 41st millennium, the tale of Karho served as a stark reminder of the galaxy's inherent dangers, of the seductive power of unchecked ambition, and the horrifying consequences of tampering with the very essence of life. He had sought to elevate his kindred, to free them from the limitations of their biology. But in doing so, he had become a monster, sacrificing not just his soul, but the very identity of his people, creating a legacy of terror and an eternal hunt that would forever plague the stars. The Kroot, once pragmatic auxiliaries, now bore the indelible stain of Karho's monstrous ambition, a grim testament to the fact that in the grim darkness of the far future, even hope can breed the most terrifying of horrors.